my advice would be, at every possible potential point, try and expand your reference pool. Oh my goodness, that is a big question.
Your time now.
Hi, I'm Steve Duke, and this is the Two Roads Podcast. Today on the show, we have Rebecca Thomas. Now, Rebecca lives a really cool life. It's pretty unique, it's pretty interesting, and I think a lot of people will be quite envious of the life that she's built for herself. So several years ago, she sat down with her husband when they were living in Sydney and basically conjured up this dream life for themselves. And it evolved around two things. The first one was sunshine, and the second one was about spending time with the people that they liked most in the world. And then over the next couple of years, they kind of built and worked on this dream and turned it into a reality. So now they spend half their year in Europe, where they're renovating a 16th century barn in France, and then the other half of the year in Australia. So they are always skipping winter, but also always spending time with the people that they love and want to spend time with in the world. On this episode, you're going to hear about why you should take a sabbatical. Rebecca's taken 3 across her career, but more importantly, how to take a sabbatical and how to get the most out of it. How Rebecca designed this dream life for herself and her husband and then made it into reality. Rebecca's advice for finding your purpose. The rituals Rebecca has implemented in her own life to make sure that she stays on track with her goals, but then also allows her to find happiness. We talk about things like joy days and medicine walks, which are things I'd never heard about before, but I'm definitely going to take and try out in my own life. And finally, we talk about 2 things that hold people back from building a life they love, and probably more importantly, how you can get past them. As always, if you want more content like this on helping to build a life that you love, find work that you find meaning and purpose in, or just hear other stories of cool people who've done interesting things with their lives, you can go and find me on socials. Instagram, it's the Two Roads Pod, and then on LinkedIn, it's just my personal profile, Steve Duke. But for now, I hope you enjoy my chat with Rebecca Thomas. Let's get into it. Why do you think people should take a sabbatical?
I think for me, it's all around, if approached correctly, a moment in time where you can really pause and almost jump into sacred time to be able to design your own best life. Certainly for me, that's what it helped me do. I think it was a total game changer with regards to how I approached life and almost what is possible, taking that time to really slow down and explore what is possible.
So what's the difference between that and just like taking a holiday?
I think 2 things stand out for me. One is intention and really knowing why you want to take the sabbatical and having an intention for that period of time, rather than just, I don't know, going, off with mates to a holiday in the sun. And then the second thing is that difference and differentiator between sacred time and business as usual, as it were. So as well, I think length comes into that. But if we think about the Greeks, they had 2 words for time. They had the chronos, which is the, your hours, your minutes, what can be measured. That for me is your BAU time, time that we have always, and we're constantly kind of fighting against that. I think the difference between a holiday and a sabbatical is sabbatical really plays into that kairos time, which the Greeks classed as the time that really are periods of time that almost can't be measured. You measure them on the usefulness or the consequential impact. And that for me is the sacred time. I've got a friend who's got a company called Wonder, which is an incredible company around finding wonder in the world. And she talks about sacred time. And for me, I think that's the difference between a holiday and a sabbatical.
Right. So it's about kind of creating this like space for yourself and having the time and having the intention as well, I think is a really important part that you mentioned, where you can say, hey, this isn't just, me going to sit by the pool and relax, but I'm going here with a purpose. I have a purpose for this mission, for this like time that I'm going to take out, and I'm going to try and figure something out about it. So you've taken three sabbaticals across your life, is that right?
I have, and now I feel as though I am constantly on what's somewhat a sabbatical.
So what was your first sabbatical, and did you kind of go on it with the intention of trying to figure something out about your career or about kind of what you wanted to do with your life at that point?
No, I think the first sabbatical, if I think about the three sabbaticals that I've taken, the first one, almost I don't even know if I knew at the time that it was a sabbatical, which is also, when I look back, why it was, to me, if I'm measuring the success of sabbaticals, the worst one. My husband and I were moving to Australia from the UK, and we took a period of time out in between that. There was no intention, and yeah, it just was almost travel. The second one for me was the one where I really feel like I nailed it. And that was where I was at a crossroads in my career. And I was almost in this place of duality between what I wanted to do next, what I wanted life to look like. I was sort of between the UK and Australia. And that really was intentional. So that was very much around taking time out to look at what the next chapter looked like, where that next chapter was, and how we could make that work. And then my final sabbatical was a lot shorter. So that middle one was about 6 months. The third one was a lot shorter and actually was a solo sabbatical, and was probably 2 years before we made the jump into our new life. So 3 years post my husband and I sabbatical together. And really for me, that one was just cementing that, yes, we were on the right path. I was on the right path. The dream that we had created together was what I wanted. And that was, a solo sabbatical for a month in between contracting and a permanent gig.
Yeah, right. And so what was that dream that you both created together?
So the dream was built on two non-negotiables. One was sunshine and the weather. So we absolutely love summer, love living in summer, and hate winter. We both hate the cold. And it was like, is there a way we can create a life that is chasing the sun, essentially? And then the second piece was built on our favourite people. So we are lucky to have so many amazing people in our life. As I mentioned, we're originally from the UK, and then have spent 13 years in Australia. And we've got amazing people in both. And we didn't want to, give up both or one or the other, So it was about creating this life where we could have our cake and eat it, essentially. So the life that we dreamed up was to throw the normal blueprint of, corporate until you retire, or staying in one place until you retire, and actually being able to spend the Northern Hemisphere summer in Europe and be able to share that with our favourite people in this side of the world, and then spend the Southern Hemisphere in Oz and Asia, or, sort of in the sun, and spend time with our favourite people in that side of the world.
Okay, hold up 1 second. I'm sorry to have to interrupt this episode, but I do want to remind you that if you want more content on how to find a job and a life that you love, you can find it on our socials. So on Instagram, go to Two Roads Pod, and on LinkedIn, just find my personal account called Steve Duke. And of course, these podcasts are released weekly, where I interview people, and that's extremely helpful for people to get inspiration and hear other people's stories and how they did it and what they're going through. But I also release a ton of other content as well to help you both figure out what it is that you want to do, and also how to then make that actually happen. So LinkedIn and Instagram. And LinkedIn,
Steve Duke, just my name. And then on Instagram, you can find us at 2 Roads Pod.
I think this is so incredible. I've got tons of questions to ask you because I would say I'm in a somewhat similar situation that you might have been in maybe a few years ago, where I've been living in Australia for a few years. I love it. I love the sun. I've got a lot of people here that I love spending time with and I care about. But of course, like my family and my kind of longest friends are all back home, and I always feel this like split between the two of them. I always struggle to like. There's no way to get them all in the one place, right? You just can't do it. And so I'm very interested to figure out like what this experience has been like for you, for kind of my own situation. But yeah, give me a bit more details then about what that life looks like for you now. Like, what do you do for work? What's your husband do for work? How do you kind of manage the living situation? Like, do you have a place in, two different countries? Like, how does it all work? Like, I'm very interested.
Okay, so probably where to start is to take you back to the UK. So in the UK, we had a property which we never gave up when we moved to Australia. So we're lucky enough that we still have a property in the UK. That gives us a source of income, consistently through the year. But we don't spend a huge amount of time in the UK. So from a base perspective, we don't actually have a base in the UK. So we go back and spend it with my parents when we're back there. And then floating really between our favourite people. France, we do. So we bought a barn, a derelict barn, 16th century barn, in 2008 on a bit of a whim. The year we got married, and the sort of plan was that we would spend, busman's holiday, because my husband was in construction and utilities, coming out here in the summer, doing a bit of work and then travelling back and whatever. So that was bought, as I say, in 2008. I then got the opportunity in 2011 to go over to go to Australia and be sponsored by my company. And so this almost got totally shut up. So we just literally kind of closed the doors and sort of parked this. Went to Oz stupidly, and it's probably my one big regret, didn't buy in Oz. We so should have done. But in Oz, we don't have a base, so we would rent when we go back to Oz. So for that period of time that we're in Australia, we, rent either a room or an apartment in Australia. With regards to how that looks, as I say, it's the summer months in France. And now that is very much on renovating this barn. As you can see behind me, it is still somewhat derelict in areas. If you can imagine it in thirds, when we bought it, 1/3 was totally dilapidated, like walls caving in. 2/3 was just a barn. The roof was totally caved in. It needed a whole new roof and everything like that. So it's a huge project. I think a project I probably totally underestimated. But my husband, when we are in France, this is his job, essentially. It's both of our jobs. We're renovating when we're in France. I have been in recruitment for 18, 19 years. And so when we dreamed up this life, I looked at going out and consulting on my own and doing some bits with recruitment on my own. So I work some of the time in Australia with a strategy recruitment company, as you know, and I also do some leadership coaching and mentoring with recruitment leaders. When we were on our sabbatical together, I took a lot of time to really look at what I wanted to do. I had never moved role or company with intention, right? I had always fallen into, I fell into a graduate scheme after university. I fell into recruitment. The company I worked with was so amazing for throwing opportunities at you before you were ready, like identifying top talent and throwing you opportunities. So you're never bored. But also what that means is you never actually move with intention. You're thrown the opportunities and you sort of grab them. When there was intention in leaving that company, but because of my network, I then fell into a project and consulting, and then that, turned into a permanent role. So I felt as though I had never actually chosen what I wanted to do. So through our sabbatical, I really looked at, okay, what were my passions? I don't know if you've heard of the Japanese concept of ikigai. So I looked at, I went down that rabbit hole. I love travel, have always loved travel. I love the coaching piece. So I trained as a coach, and have basically married my passions, which is that sort of travel, that taking a sabbatical, and the coaching piece, and I'm now offering sabbatical and career break coaching as well. So I kind of have those three parts of work, and my husband then sometimes when we're back in Australia will go back and work for some of the boys in construction that he used to work with. So that's basically, in a nutshell, life.
It's quite cool. It's a very fascinating setup that you have. I'm interested to know, when you sat down a number of years ago and you kind of dreamt up this life, and it probably felt amazing at the time to think of this future where you're splitting your time across two different countries or two different regions, continents, getting to spend all your time in the sun, skipping winter, spending your time with all of your favorite people in the world. But I think sometimes we think up of these dreams, and then when the dream itself is probably more enjoyable than the actual reality of it occurring, or maybe we forget how to enjoy it. But now that you're kind of down that path and you've actually created this life for yourself and brought this dream to life, is it all that you hoped for?
Yeah, and more, I would say. I think the hardest part is the house, is the work on the house. I have been lucky in the fact that I have worked with amazing people all the way through my career and amazing leaders, and they have taught me so much and so well, and have been so patient with me. My husband is now almost the boss. He's not as patient. So the relationship and actually the working on the house has been the biggest challenge. I think I underestimated how compartmentalized life was. I went to work, he went to work, didn't see each other, and so then you come back together, and we spend 24/7 together now. So we've really had to look at strategies around how to still have an amazing relationship when we're not on site.
Yeah, I can imagine that's tricky. I've interviewed a couple of people here who work with their other halves, and they always say it's great, but you better be prepared to do it. And there's some things that they can do to. I had a woman called Alicia Conlon Heard on one of my early episodes, and she works with her partner. They actually also now kind of living a remote lifestyle, kind of traveling around Asia, and she was just like, "Yep, it works super well," but we've implemented these kind of processes and check-ins with ourselves to make sure that, we keep work and relation. We have those boundaries, or we have kind of ways that we can still work together without killing each other, which seems important to me.
Yeah, it's compartmentalizing it. It's basically, this is work, and our kind of ritual is a shower. So once you're in your scruffs, you go and have a shower, you're then in normal clothes, and that's when you're husband and wife again.
Yep. I think that's very good. I like that. People might be listening to this, right, and say, geez, this sounds like an amazing life, right? That you can split your time across two different continents, but they might be worried about whether they could actually do it or not. And I'm talking mainly from a financial perspective. Do you find that this is significantly more expensive than, is it more expensive than if you were to be based kind of in one place permanently? Is it comparable? Is it less? How would it compare to if you were just, say, full-time living in either the UK or in Australia?
Interesting. I can't answer you on whether it's more or less. I don't know. No, I haven't. I mean, comparably from a, I suppose, disposable income perspective, it costs, our lifestyle definitely costs less as is than as it was in Sydney, without a doubt. Because if you think of Sydney rent, we're lucky enough that we bought this barn, as I say, years ago, and don't have a mortgage or anything on it. But also, with that comes the cost of living in a building site. So yes, it will be amazing once it's done, but we will have had 4 years where, I still don't have hot water on tap.
Okay. Yeah, right. So those showers at the end of the day to,
are outside in the shed at the moment. So this is not, if you think you're living the dream on a day-to-day perspective in France, we are from the fact of fundamentals of, being with the people that we love and our favourite people, it being summertime, all of that. But actually, if I think life was so easy in Sydney, we had a beautiful apartment with everything on our doorstep, so much choice, sparkling harbour in front of us, like amazing. So this costs, our way of life now definitely costs less, but we're earning less as well, right? So it's relative. When we're in France, or if I take you back to how we made it work, from coming back from our sabbatical, we sat with a few beers overlooking Sydney Harbour, and we were like, right, how do we reverse engineer this? In recruitment, we're all about reverse engineering. So it was like, right, okay, how do we reverse engineer? What do we need? How long is it going to take? And we engineered reverse engineered the whole plan. And my husband was the one that sort of worked out money wise what we would need to complete and build the project in France, so that we had no debt, because that we didn't want debt. And so we worked out the plan would be a 5-year plan. We worked out savings goals. We worked out that I would, work on creating a network and looking at, training as a coach, etc. So we're in a privileged position where we planned for that, and it now does work, and we're lucky enough that it does work.
A lot of people who might be listening to this podcast are thinking about, how do they find a purpose or a sense of like meaning, either in their jobs or like in their broader lives, right? And I think especially as people go through their 20s and 30s, this is a big question. People come out of university or come out of school, they get into a job, they don't think too much about what they're doing, perhaps. Maybe they do, but in a couple of years' time, they're like, hey, not loving this thing. Like maybe there's something more to it. I wonder if what's out there, and kind of have that kind of sense of like, oh, I'm yearning for something a little bit bigger than myself, something I can find purpose in or a meaning. I was reading your blog post yesterday where you said that after 3 sabbaticals, you finally did find your purpose. What is your purpose?
So my infinite purpose, which comes from Simon Sinek, where he talks about an infinite purpose which you can never achieve, right? Which is, it really resonates with me, because I'm that sort of person that I need something that I'm constantly striving for, is to create a kinder and more equitable world. And that, for me, comes down to, really aligns with my values. What that means to me, though, and interestingly, it's taken probably 7 years of really kind of digging and reiterating and looking at what my purpose is. But what that means more on a day-to-day basis, what gets me up in the morning, is actually my nieces and godkids, where I really want to be able to help them build a toolkit that will see them thrive in life, and almost see them thrive and become successful in their own unique way. Because I think society tells us so much of what we should be doing, or, you know, what, I don't know, has happened before, and this is what you need to be doing, or these are the only options. And I want to throw that all out. So my purpose is to build a kinder, more equitable life. But in the actual day-to-day, that's really being able to share the wonder and the magnificence of being able to really create your own best life design with my nieces and godchildren.
And how did you get to this point where you kind of have clarity around what your purpose is? Because, you know, to bring it back to people who might be listening, they might be kind of at the very start of this journey and saying like, well, I don't know what it is. But what's even worse is like, how the hell am I going to figure it out? Like, what do I need to do? Do I need to go and, you know, live with the monks for a few weeks, or like, you know, what like what was there anything that what was that journey like for you to the point where you kind of have clarity on what your purpose is?
It was long. It was a lot of different, I suppose, consuming of things around how to find your purpose. So podcasts, books. I went to an amazing seminar. A real memorable moment for me was going to a seminar put on by Morgan McKinley in Sydney, actually, with a lady who is called Jill. Can't remember her surname, but she was the ex-APAC strategy director for Coke, and she has written a book on best life design, Jill McLaren. And she really, for me, put it down so well. Like, I'm quite black and white. I quite like a formula, or a, you know, like, yes, I can do the journaling
Process.
Yeah, but I really like that, you know, black and white sort of process. And she, being a strategist, very much put this process down. So I bought her book and worked through that. I stumbled across Ikigai on a podcast, and so then went down that rabbit hole. So really, it's just been around journaling, dreaming, taking time, and you know, away from your busy schedule, and really doing that inner work.
From my own experience, where I would say I'm kind of midway through this journey, and having talked to other people about what their experiences have been like around coming to a point where they found their purpose, I think that there's no prescription. Like, there's no single process that's going to work for anybody. But I think what you do need is the intention. So you need to say, this is something that I want to figure out. I'm not just going to let myself drift. I'd like to figure out what this is for me, and then to kind of pull on that thread and keep pulling. And it might lead you down to reading a book, or, you know, talking to different people, or listening to a podcast, doing some exercises, going on a trip, trying something out, prototyping something in your own life. And it's just this like kind of constant process. But unfortunately, I don't think there's any one thing somebody can say is like, okay, we'll just sit down, do steps 1, 2, and 3, and at the end of it, don't worry, you'll know your purpose in life. It just tends not to work like that, I guess. Which is both frustrating. It's kind of frustrating.
Yeah, and you know, if there was, it would be easy. Everybody would know it, right? And everybody would know it within a finite amount of time. But it's reiterating and you know, enjoying the journey as well. I think I've loved the journey. I love learning constantly, and that self-development. I don't know whether it ever stops. You know, Simon Sinek says your why never changes. I don't know. Like, I don't know whether that's for sure. Like, I've worked with clients where they absolutely knew their why and knew their purpose, and somewhere along the line it's got lost. And, you know, when we come to a point where actually there's that light bulb moment and they find it again, sometimes it is slightly different. You know, they're at a different stage in life. Things mean different things to them at that point. They might have had children now where they didn't before, might be in a different country. Like, yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a really good point. On that kind of point of infinite purpose and how it changes, I listened to a podcast recently with Dan Carter, the rugby player, who is a big idol of mine, and he was talking about when he played rugby, he had this bigger purpose, which is, well, actually, and how it changed, right? So he talked at the start of it, his purpose when he was kind of growing up and kind of a teenager and playing rugby was all about becoming an All Black. And then he said that when he got his very first cap as a like 20-year-old or something for the All Blacks, he was like, oh shit, I just completed it. And he was kind of like, if I don't come up with something else, what's next, right? So then he had to go through this process of like redefining his purpose and his why. And then that was when he wanted to be a great All Black. And then that served him for kind of the next, decade or decade and a half. But then he's talking recently about the fact that once he retired, of course, like, he can't play anymore, right? So if he leaves his purpose as being kind of a great All Black, and that's something he can't actually do anymore, so he needed to redefine that again and go through that process of like redefining his why and finding something that he can strive towards, and not just say, okay, well, I'm done, I've parked it, I've achieved it. And I think that's really important. I definitely think it can change. But, because of like circumstances changing, maybe you can't do your job anymore, but also like, you get different perspectives on life as you grow up and have different experiences, or if you have kids, or if somebody you love passes away, like that's going to change how you think about life. So I don't see why it wouldn't change your why as well. I want to come back to this idea that you were talking about of taking a sabbatical. So if somebody is kind of thinking about taking a sabbatical, or if they're in a job right now and they're like, do you know what, I'd love to take some time to go and figure out a few things about myself, figure out my purpose, whatever else it is. You talked a little bit about having kind of an intention and creating that kind of sacred time and sacred space for yourself. Is there anything else that you would kind of advise people who are thinking about taking a sabbatical in order to get the most out of it?
Yeah, we've talked about finding your why. That is the first place that I would advise anybody to start. Why do you want to take this period of time off? And really exploring the why. That then almost leads you onto what that period of time looks like, where you'll spend it, when you might take it, with whom you might take it, and really what you want to get out of it. I've got an example of a client that I worked with who, they'd landed on the fact that they were going to take a sabbatical. Great. This is where they were going to go. This is what they were going to do. And when we actually explored why they wanted to take a sabbatical and how they wanted to feel during and also post, like what they wanted future them to look like after this period of sacred time, what they chose to do on their sabbatical totally changed. Because actually, initially it was like, oh, well, I need to do a personal challenge and I'm going to climb a mountain and da, da, da. Anyway, they were going to climb Kilimanjaro because everybody does that, and that's something that they should do. But actually, when we explored what they need out of their sabbatical and why they were taking it, that totally didn't align. So it changed their whole way of looking at what to do, and also with who. I think there's again, it's really ripping out all of those pre-conditioned ideas of what we should be doing. Another piece that actually I wrote about on LinkedIn the other day was around where, and having that, certainly as an expat, I think that guilt attached to, when you go back to your home country, staying with family or staying with friends. And actually, if it's a sabbatical and you know what you need to get out of it and why you're taking it, and that environment doesn't actually lend itself to the outcome, then don't spend time living with mum and dad, or living with a brother who actually is not going to create the environment that you need. Find a safe space to, I don't know, rent or have an Airbnb, or I think it's around those. I look at the 6 W's, which is why, where, when, who with, what, and then also who do you want future you to look like.
I think that's a fantastic framework to kind of help you think through that and to kind of like avoid some of just like the preconditioned ideas of like, oh, I'm in my 20s, I should go to Asia. It's like, well, should you? Like, is that what you want to do? Yeah. Well, but how do you, like, you obviously work with people to kind of coach them through this. How do you help people to let go of these preconditioned ideas? Because it's very strong and the power of them is very powerful, right? And if somebody asks us what we want to do, we very often just think of these preconditioned thoughts, or we think of what other people have done. And I read this really interesting book called I think it's called Wanting, about like mimetic desire, and how the fact that like as humans, like we're just naturally preconditioned to want what the people around us want, right? And so you're actually fighting quite a strong natural tendency to fall into these kind of preconditioned ideas. How do you help people let go of those and find what it is that is true to them that they really want?
As a coach, it's just about asking the right questions, to be honest, and having a safe space for the individual to start to explore their own desires and motivators, and asking the right questions, really.
What does that, how do you know what the right question is?
Everybody has their answers within them. We all, I think, fundamentally, if we all took time and are asked the right questions, we've all got the answers within us. The right questions are the questions such as, what makes you feel like you should do this? Or what is the alternative? Or what else could you do? Or what could life look like if it was not X, Y, or Z? So there's just a lot of questions that I think people don't ask themselves. We're on this kind of treadmill of life, and it's just taking the time to pause and asking yourself the questions. And that, of course, is what a coach does. If people don't or can't do it themselves.
And so these people who are, a lot of people are kind of stuck on a treadmill, or stuck doing something that is fine, right? Pays them a wage, or they're in a life that they're like, look, there's nothing wrong with my life, it's fine. But I feel like there's a something bigger out there, something that I would really love, like a dream life out there that they might want to pursue. You work with people and you kind of your own experiences over your life of kind of seeing people in those situations. Maybe some people have come through it, some people haven't. What do you think are the biggest reasons that kind of stop people from getting off that treadmill?
I think the two main are fear and guilt. So fear of failure, fear of maybe life being what, if you're living an okay life. If I think about our life in Sydney, it was bloody amazing. Like, that was totally living the dream. I was not showering outside. I had hot water on demand. Like that was I was having cocktails every night after work. But I think there is a fear that, oh my goodness, could life, if I make this move, will life be worse? Fear of not being able to afford it, as we've spoken about. Fear of failure, fear of change. I think we're conditioned to change is hard, rather than embracing change. I think I not read a book. I listened to a podcast actually about the status game and everybody playing a status game, and it's not the same status game. But I think Will Storr, I think, has written this book around everybody every human is playing some kind of a status game, whether it's a status game of financial, whether it's a status game of getting a promotion or title, whether it's a status game of freedom. Am I playing a status game? Yeah, my status game is freedom, and wellness. But I think if we're aware of what our status game is that we're playing, and then being able to reframe that can somewhat, I think, alleviate some of the fear. But I think fear is a big one. I think the other one is guilt. And I certainly, through my time in Australia, felt guilty constantly of being away from family, of missing milestones, birthdays, funerals. I mean, things happen, and you feel this constant sense of guilt, the constant sense of, when are you coming back? Or is Australia going to be forever? Or, and just that, even if the people asking the questions, their intent is not to make you feel guilty inside, I certainly did, and I know others that do. So I think that guilt around, kids. Well, I can't leave my kids, or parents, or partners, or colleagues. If I think about people taking sabbaticals, there's a big piece around, my goodness, I can't leave this workload for my colleagues. I'm on this huge project. So I think fear and guilt are the two big ones.
Guilt is an awful feeling. I think guilt is like, there's something very deep about how guilt can kind of hurt you or like cut you, because it as you were saying, it plays on all of these relationship strings, which is like, it's not just about yourself. It's like, no, but it's like, what would your mum think? What would your dad think? You know what I mean? What would your colleague think? Like, you can't let them down. I think that's a very, very strong one. And I don't know what it's like in other cultures, but I think particularly in Irish and perhaps British cultures, there's something very strong about guilt, and also about shame, and how that impacts our decisions. And do you think the same?
Yeah, I think it also comes down to the individual, and the work that somebody can do around that. I know that a lot of people that I work with, I'm just trying to think about culturally, whether there's a trend around, culturally. I think it's probably hardwired into most humans. If I think about people that I work with, there's no differentiator really around culture or nationality. It is, I think, what changes is the guilt you feel, or one feels, to a certain individual or circumstance. But actually, in most, I think it's hardwired into humans. And I wonder why that is. I wonder where that comes from.
Yeah, it's a good question. I wonder, is it tied back to, from an evolutionary perspective, our need to be like part of a group, right? And I think this also plays into the fear aspect as well, right? Whereas, thousands of years ago, if you were part of the tribe, you were all good. You could survive. The tribe protected you. Tribe fed you. You helped them. They helped you, and you could survive. If you got kicked out of the tribe and you weren't allowed in the little village and inside that protection, like, you would literally die, right? So, like, from an evolutionary perspective, we evolved to want to be part of the tribe. And there's probably, that guilt is perhaps a signal for us at times, saying like, hey, maybe, if you're going to keep doing this thing, they might kick you out of the tribe. And if you're out there, then, it's dangerous out there. You might want to be out there. Of course, like, that doesn't really matter much anymore, right? Like, we're still going to live. I actually find it interesting in so many of these conversations, whether it's about guilt or fear or any of the other things that we do, we're dealing with these kind of evolutionary tendencies that we've developed, which were maybe helpful like 5,000 years ago. But you know what? We don't need to worry anymore about being eaten by a lion. Like we're pretty good, but we still have them like ingrained in ourselves. I think when you talk about status games, it's the same thing, right? We want to play status games because, from an evolutionary perspective, the high status people were the ones who, got to get the most mates, and they were the ones who had the most children, and so that gene just continued on growing. But nowadays it's like that can draw us into doing a whole load of things that actually won't make us happy. It might lead us to having more kids, but that doesn't necessarily lead to more happiness either. So I find it interesting from that perspective. And on that part with fear, right? So I think this gets talked about a lot, which is like, don't be afraid of failure. Like failure is actually a good thing, and you should go out there and just do the thing. And like rationally, that all makes sense. But there's a big gap between understanding rationally that you should do something and actually being able to go and do it, right? And being able to say, yeah, I'm afraid, but I'm still going to do it. Have you ever found anything to kind of help people to get through that barrier, to kind of convert that rational understanding into action?
So I think what's worked for me, and certainly what's worked for others, is to take yourself to worst case scenario. And we talked around, my life's all right. My life's not bad. I just think there might be, something more or something bigger out there. So actually worst case scenario is life right now. So is that such a bad thing? If worst case scenario is being in the same place, then, I think that's a concept that's certainly helped me, but helped others as well.
Yeah. I was reading this blog post. And actually, I'd recommend people to go and read, because I really enjoyed it. I'll put it in the show notes afterwards. And one of the things that you wrote, I think this might have been kind of after you came back from one of your sabbaticals, you're trying to kind of, implement maybe some of the things and start to create this life that it is that you want to live. And you wrote that you were determined to lace rituals into your life that served you moving forward and kept you focused and accountable. What were some of those rituals? What did the kind of practicality of some of that change look like?
Yeah, and I think this was fundamentally the game changer around that sabbatical being so successful. Is I mentioned my husband and I sat with a couple of beers overlooking Sydney Harbour, and after the sabbatical, I was like, right, okay, this is the plan. This is how we're going to get there. I then was absolutely motivated and almost fixated on having rituals to ensure that we didn't lose track. And one of those was vision boarding. So we came back in February, I think. And so I vision boarded for our life, so the dream life, but then I also break that down every year. So I vision boarded at the beginning of the year. I had yearly and quarterly, it sounds very clinical, but yearly and quarterly goals and plans. I laced yoga, meditation and breath work throughout. So I really started on my journey around wellness, and that gave me then, the space and the time to just be able to have me time and know that I was on the right journey. One of my coaches advised me to, or not advised me, but she laces joy days into her life. And so I adopted that concept, and I absolutely love joy days. So I have a joy day every month, and a joy day is no tech, only things that absolutely make your heart sing. So be totally selfish. If you don't want to be around anyone that day, don't be, have it just as you. If you want to spend it with your favourite people, spend it with your favourite people. But, one of my joy days last month, my husband was back in the UK. So I went mooching round like shops just, trinket shops, and because he hates doing that, but I love doing that. So, like that kind of thing. A massage, a spa, and then a medicine walk as well. That was another practice that I laced into, or ritual that I laced into my integration of my sabbatical, was medicine walks. So I did a medicine walk in nature probably every quarter, maybe every 6 months. And that really is an intentional walk in nature where you have an entrance into the walk and you cross a threshold, and you might have a question to ask, and you very much intentionally say it out loud, and then just wander and go for a wander. So if you think about Aborigines going on walkabout, or we've wandered for years, but I think we've lost that connection to nature, and that really was around me knowing that I was still on the right path, and continuing on that path. So yeah, lots of different practices that I laced through the next 5 years, and actually I'm still doing.
I think I'm going to steal a couple of those, especially that joy day. It sounds wonderful.
It's great, yeah.
I've started to, I've become very interested in these kind of concepts of rituals or building little kind of traditions for yourself. And over the last couple of months, I've just started to implement them. And they're fantastic. They're amazing. And I think maybe I chanced upon, I wouldn't call it a joy day, but perhaps like a joy afternoon, which is like Friday afternoons, try and like finish work early, go to the same cafe. And then after that, I'm just like, whatever you want to do, it's you. Right. And I force myself, and I know, like on Thursday evenings, I'm like, right, I got to write down everything that I need to get done before Thursday afternoon or before Friday afternoon, because I got to get it done, because then I can have like my me time on the Friday afternoon, and not let like work or other things just like leak into that time, and like to protect it. And it's great. Like I look forward to it every week, and it's like a nice little way to start the weekend, which is fantastic. So I'm definitely going to steal a couple of those.
But it's hard, right?
Oh yeah, it is hard.
To begin with, certainly. It's habit then.
This is what I was going to say. It's like harder at the start, right? So it's like, because you're like, it's not a tradition yet. So like missing it, you're like, well, I've only been doing this for 3 weeks. Like who cares if I miss it, right? But then other ones that I've had for a bit longer, the longer you've been doing them, the more protective you become of them. And you're like, no, I can't miss that. Like I do that every week, every Saturday morning I do that. Like I can't miss it. And it's really nice. Like, and it's a bit of a forced, it is habit, and it's kind of like forced discipline, right? Of course you can miss it. Like it doesn't actually matter, but at the same time it does, right? And it's really nice to have these like little rituals to look forward to, and to force yourself to do them, especially when you don't, because you may not feel like it, right? Like if Thursday's rolling around and I'm like, I've got a lot of work to do before the end of this week, I don't really feel like taking off a Friday like late afternoon. It's just like, no, like force yourself to get it done, force yourself to keep the ritual. And I'm always happy that I've done it, right? I never look back and like, oh, I wish I'd given it up this week. Of course not. I'm interested to know, if you were to kind of go back and talk to yourself when you were, 25, say, what would you say to that Rebecca at 25?
At 25, where was I at 25? I'm just trying to think. I would say it's going to be all right. Like everything works out. I would say, if you've got a decision to make, fast forward 5 years, 10 years, and look back on what's the decision you won't regret. Because I think that is something that I very much now do, and holds me in really good stead. What would future you want you to do, and what will you not regret? If I was being very clinical, what would I advise the 30-year-old me that stepped off the plane in Australia to do: get a good tax accountant and a good financial advisor. I spent way too much money and time partying hard.
I don't know if a tax accountant can help you with that. I think you need something more severe.
Yeah, that's what I would say.
And what about kind of for somebody else now who might be, in their 20s, in their 30s, like maybe they're doing a job that they think is fine, but like they know don't want to be doing it forever. What would you say to those people? What advice would you have for them?
I think my piece of advice would be something that I heard Brene Brown talk about actually only recently, which is around a reference pool. And my advice would be, at every possible potential point, try and expand your reference pool, because I think that's what gives you options. We don't know what we don't know. And so if we don't know that, then we don't know what's possible. So my advice would be, at every point, expand your reference pool. And that means not saying yes to everything, but if we think about opportunity, if we think about travel, meeting new people, doing different things, reading different books that you wouldn't necessarily normally read, listening to podcasts, being diverse in your approach. To me, I think that's expanding your reference pool would be my one piece of advice.
I think that's a fantastic piece of advice. I really like that. The last thing that I want to talk to you about is a very selfish topic. See, you've spent a good bit of time in France at this point. I don't know if you've seen outside the walls of your barn, but maybe you're
renovating a barn, yeah.
But I got to ask you. So I'm spending a couple of months in France. Later this year, I'm over for the Rugby World Cup. As somebody who's spent a bit of time in France, is there anything that is there anything you'd recommend for me to do, like some experiences or things that you're like, oh, this is a great way. Okay, here's a better way to do it. If I had a joy day, right? Of course, this is personal to me, and you don't know necessarily what my preferences would be. But like, what are some things that I could potentially do for my joy day while I'm in France?
Oh my goodness, that is a big question.
Okay, well, what would be your favorite thing apart from trinket shopping? Because I'm not going to do that.
So, are you going to Paris?
I will be in Paris for a short time. Yeah.
Okay, so if I think about a joy day in Paris, for me, it would be turning off technology, not even having a map, and just wandering around the streets of Paris, down the Seine, and just get lost. Like, get lost. You're never really lost, right? And I think that's what we forget, is we have this, especially when we're traveling, oh, we must do tick, 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 tick. And actually, I think it's the moments where we're lost that come up with the most wonderful moments. Anything that sparks your eye or interest, go into that shop. Is it a random bookshop or an old record store, or something that you wouldn't put on your list? I think that's what I would say. So actually, that's not just Paris, that's anywhere. Turn off technology, don't have a map, and just get lost. A practice that also I love doing when I'm traveling is not having technology on all day, and then having a wonderful day, but then sitting with half an hour or 45 minutes at the end of the day and questioning everything. So then turning technology back on, because of course it's an amazing resource, right? But questioning everything. So what was that church that I stumbled across that didn't have any kind of language that I could work out or whatever? And going down a rabbit hole of that said church, or that tea that I drank, like, my goodness, what was it, or where was it from, and really just then exploring the day, and you'll be amazed at what random stuff comes up and what you learn. The other thing when you're in Paris, and this is very just a personal preference of mine, there's they call it, or certainly that my Parisian friends call it, their equivalent to McDonald's. And I would totally recommend it as a restaurant. And it's basically built on the fundamentals that there was a guy years and years ago that was a butcher, but he was a butcher for the real rich. And so he had a lot of the old cuts of meat that he used to have to throw away. So instead what he did was he set up these huge kind of workman house restaurants and used these like old sort of, offcuts of meat to feed hundreds of people at very low cost. And it's basically continued. And so there's 2 restaurants in Paris, and one of them is absolutely massive. Like, I can't even imagine how many. I think they probably do 2,000 to 3,000 covers an evening. Like, it's absolutely massive. Yeah. It's huge, absolutely huge. And it's just an immense experience because the energy and the vibe but it's super cheap. So, like a starter's €2 or €3. A main course it's mental, but it's good food. And it's certainly nothing like McDonald's, but yeah, the Parisians it's our equivalent of McDonald's. So go there.
What? Definitely adding that to my list. What's it called? Do you know the name of them?
Oh goodness, I can't remember. I'll have to send it to you.
Yeah, send it to me. That's going on my list.
There's 2. There's one up by Moulin Rouge, and then there's one sort of down towards Notre Dame. But yeah, they're amazing.
Okay, that's a great tip. I don't think I would have got that one.
That's it. And then I think also just the lead up is always fun to holiday.
Just the anticipation of it. I'm making a conscious decision to look forward to this holiday because I was talking about my friends recently, which is like, I remember when I was a little kid and we would go on our summer holiday, I wouldn't be able to sleep like for like 3 nights before we would go on holiday. I'd be like so excited. I'm like, there's going to be a pool. I'm going to be able to jump in the pool and like, play football. Like, wow, like what an amazing time. I'd be so excited. And then you grow up and, you still look forward to them. And then you become an adult and you kind of start going on loads of holidays. And like, it's kind of sad, but you kind of can get used to them and you can get a little bit, I've been on holidays, and this is going to sound awful, but like, where you're kind of like, oh yeah, I'm off tomorrow, sure, like you're not even looking forward to it. I'm like, what the hell? This is stupid. Like, so I've made a very, very conscious decision to be like, because I think it is actually just creating the headspace for yourself to be like, no, this is going to be great. I'm going to look forward to it. I'm going to put a little bit of effort into planning some things so that I can make the most of it, but also having that freedom to just wander. And I think that kind of being conscious about it, to come back to where we started the whole conversation, setting an intention for a trip can really make you enjoy it a lot more than just kind of falling into it, rushing through it, and then at the end of it, like, oh yeah, I guess I was there. I ticked all the boxes of things I wanted to do, but did I enjoy them? I don't know. Maybe. It's a bit different.
So really exploring, everything French.
Yeah, exactly. I love your idea of just like wandering around and then kind of sitting down to explore, in the evening and kind of like be conscious about like, where was that? And actually, read the whole Wikipedia page and figure out what the hell was going on in that place where you were. I think it's a fantastic idea.
What did you stumble upon?
Yeah, exactly. But Rebecca, thank you so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed it. If people want to find you like online, where's the best place for them to go?
Best place is probably LinkedIn, so Rebecca Thomas. And then I've also got Instagram pages, so Bexley Brown and Feel Good Getaways.
Awesome. I'll chuck the links all into the comments so people can just click on them and find you.
Thank you. And thank you very much. It's been brilliant conversation. Really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me. Feel honoured.
Ah, good. I'm glad. Of course, my pleasure. So I really hope that you enjoyed that chat that I just had with Rebecca. I want to leave you with a quote that I read for the first time many years ago, but I was flicking back through my notes this week and I came across it and I remembered just how much I love it. It's from a woman called Martha Graham. There's a vitality, a life force, an energy, a quickening that is translated through you into action. And because there's only one of you in all of time, this expression is unique. And if you block it, it will never exist through any other medium, and it will be lost. The world will not have it. It is not your business to determine how good it is, nor how valuable, nor how it compares with other expressions. It is your business to keep it yours clearly and directly, to keep the channel open. I love that quote. There's a lot in it, but I think it's amazing. Anyway, that's all for this week. I'll see you next week for episode 28 of the Two Roads podcast.
Your time now.
घमण्ड र ईर्ष्याले बिग्रेको मति छन् बिग्रेको कतिमा लागे विषयको मतलब नगरी गर्दिन हडबडीमा रमाउँछु